You ever stop and wonder why people who lived 3,000 years ago, no pills, no hospitals, no doctors on every corner, lived to be 100 years old and stayed strong till the end? I'll tell you why. Because every single day they were eating things that are either sitting forgotten in your pantry right now or gone from your plate altogether. The Bible isn't just a spiritual book, folks. It's the oldest handbook on natural healing this world has ever seen. And today, I'm gonna open it up and show you everything that's been hiding in plain sight all these years. Remember, this is for educational purposes only. Always check with your doctor before trying anything new. In 40 years of working with herbs and natural remedies, I've seen a whole lot. But every single time I open the Bible and read about olive oil, I keep thinking the same thing. How on earth did we manage to forget what folks knew 3,000 years ago? Olive oil is mentioned more than 200 times in the Bible. 200 times, think about that. Kings were anointed with it. Wounds were healed with it. Children were fed with it. It wasn't just food, it was medicine, sitting right there in every home. And here's what gets me every time. Modern science today is confirming exactly what ancient people knew from plain everyday experience for thousands of years. I'll tell you what, I know folks who spent their whole lives out in the country, started every single morning with a spoonful of olive oil on an empty stomach, and lived clear into their 90s with a sharp mind and not a single blood pressure pill to their name. My grandfather always said, if you got olive oil in the house, you got health in the house. He didn't know a lick of chemistry, but he knew life. And you know what? He was right. Now let's talk about what this oil actually does to your body after 50, because it's right around 50 that everything starts to shift. Your blood vessels start losing their flexibility, your joints start stiffening up, inflammation quietly builds up inside you, and you don't even feel it until it hits you hard. That's right where olive oil becomes your quiet ally. It contains something called oleocanthal. Now don't let that word scare you. Remember it, because it matters. Scientists found that oleocanthal works a whole lot like ibuprofen, only without the beating it gives your stomach and kidneys. It dials down chronic inflammation, that invisible slow-burning inflammation that sits at the root of heart disease, diabetes, arthritis, and even memory loss. I'm not making this up. This comes from serious research. But ancient folks didn't know the word oleocanthal. They just knew the oil helped, and they passed that knowing down hand to hand for 1,000 years. But here's what the stores ain't telling you. Not every olive oil is the same, not by a long shot. What's sitting on that shelf in a pretty bottle that just says olive oil, that's often a blend, heated and refined until there's nothing left worth having. What you need is one thing only: extra virgin, first cold press. Dark bottle, because light destroys the good stuff, and don't you go frying with it. High heat breaks down that oleocanthal. Use it in your salad, spread it on your bread, or take a spoonful first thing in the morning on an empty stomach. Folks come to me all the time with aching joints asking what they can do. I tell them the same thing every time. Start simple. 1 tablespoon of good olive oil every morning before you eat anything else. Don't expect a miracle in 3 days. Give your body 3 months. In my experience, many folks notice the difference. Joints start moving easier, blood pressure behaves better, digestion smooths right out. This ain't a pill that hits one target. This is food that supports your whole body all at once. And here's one more thing hardly anybody talks about. In the Bible, olive oil wasn't just eaten. It was rubbed on skin and wounds. The Apostle James wrote, "Anoint the sick with oil." That wasn't just tradition. Today we know olive oil contains vitamin E and polyphenols that genuinely help skin heal and protect your cells from breaking down. 3,000 years of practice, and science is only now starting to explain why. But olive oil is just the beginning, because the next thing I'm gonna tell you about fed the workers who built the Egyptian pyramids. And when the pharaoh took it away from them one day, they flat out went on strike. You already know what I'm talking about, don't you? That's coming up right now. Here's a historical fact that still gives me chills every single time I think about it. When the Egyptian pharaoh cut the rations of his workers and took garlic off their menu, they stopped building the pyramids, stopped cold. Men who were driven with whips, working in 40-degree heat, men who feared the pharaoh like a god. Those men refused to work without their garlic. It's written right there in ancient records. Ask yourself why. Because they felt it in their own bodies. Without garlic, they got weak, they got sick, they lost their strength. That wasn't superstition, folks. That was a matter of survival. Garlic is mentioned by name in the Bible. Right there in the book of Numbers, the children of Israel wandering through the desert look back at Egypt and say, "We remember the fish we ate freely, the cucumbers and melons, the leeks and the onions and the garlic." They missed garlic the same way you miss home. That tells you everything you need to know. In 40 years of working with natural remedies, I ain't never come across a single plant that's been as studied, as proven by time, and as available to every last one of us as garlic. Now let's get down to it. After 50, most folks start dealing with two things that quietly chip away at their health. First, blood pressure starts creeping up. Second, blood vessels start hardening from the inside. Doctors call it atherosclerosis. I call it the quiet trouble, because you don't feel it. Not until it fires off a heart attack or a stroke, and that's right where garlic stops being just a seasoning. It becomes a serious ally. Garlic contains something called allicin. This stuff forms the very second you crush or cut a clove. That's what gives garlic its sharp smell. And that's what does all the important work inside your body. Allicin helps relax the walls of your blood vessels. In my experience, folks who eat raw garlic regularly tend to have calmer blood pressure. Now that ain't a guarantee and it ain't a replacement for your doctor, but it's real support for your cardiovascular system that people in the ancient world already knew about. But here's what most folks don't know, and this changes everything. You got to eat garlic the right way. If you throw a whole clove straight into a hot skillet, you just killed the allicin. Heat destroys it in just a few minutes. My grandfather always said, crush the clove, let it sit 10 minutes, then do whatever you want with it. Those 10 minutes are critical. That's enough time for the allicin to form and lock in enough that even a little heat won't completely destroy it. That's a folk trick that's 3,000 years old. Folks come to me and say, I can't eat raw garlic, it tears up my stomach. I understand that. Here's what you do. Take one small clove, crush it, let it sit 10 minutes, then wrap it in a little piece of bread or mix it with a spoonful of honey. Your stomach handles that a whole lot better. Start with one clove a day. You don't need handfuls. One clove every single day is already serious support for your body. And here's something else that matters. Garlic is nature's antibiotic. In ancient times, it was used to treat wounds, infections, colds. During World War I, when medical supplies ran short, British military doctors were dressing wounds with garlic juice, and it was saving lives. That's a straight-up historical fact. Today we know allicin suppresses the growth of many bacteria and viruses. That don't mean garlic replaces antibiotics when you've got a serious infection, but as everyday immune support, it's one of the most powerful tools nature ever gave us. Now keep this in the back of your mind. I just told you about two things: olive oil and garlic, both mentioned in the Bible, both working for your heart and blood vessels, and both costing next to nothing at any store. But the next thing I'm gonna tell you about, that's a whole different story. It's what the Lord promised His people as a sign of abundance and health, and it's something folks over 50 eat completely wrong today, or avoid altogether because they think it's bad for them. I'm talking about honey, and the truth about it is gonna surprise you. A woman came to see me once. She was 62 years old. She said, I heard honey raises your blood sugar, so I haven't touched it in 10 years. 10 years without honey, because somebody somewhere scared her off it. I asked her, have you ever read what the Bible says about honey? She looked at me surprised. Well, honey is mentioned more than 60 times in the Bible. 60 times. It's called a gift from heaven, a sign of health and abundance. Solomon himself wrote, eat honey, for it is good. That ain't just poetry, folks. That's thousands of years of folk wisdom written right into the good book. Now let's sort out this fear about sugar, because there's a real important difference here that nobody talks about. There's honey, and then there's honey. What's sitting on the store shelf in a clear plastic squeeze bottle for next to nothing? That's often heated, filtered, and watered down until all that's left is the name and the sweetness. That stuff really is just sugar. But raw, unprocessed honey, that's a completely different thing altogether. It's got live enzymes, hydrogen peroxide, more than 200 biologically active compounds. That ain't sugar. That's a natural pharmacy in one spoonful. In 40 years of working with natural remedies, I've watched raw honey help folks with all kinds of problems, but especially with three things that plague nearly everybody after 50. First, digestion. Raw honey contains prebiotics, compounds that feed the good bacteria in your gut. Trust me on this. A healthy gut means a strong immune system, a clear head, and a normal weight. It's all connected. Second, sleep. A small spoonful of honey before bed helps your liver top off its glycogen stores overnight, and your brain stops waking you up at 3 in the morning hunting for energy. That's plain simple physiology, but hardly anybody knows it. Third, and this one surprises folks, it's wounds and skin. In the Bible, honey was used to treat wounds, and that ain't just tradition. Today, there's medical-grade Manuka honey being used in serious clinics to treat wounds that won't heal. Because honey creates an acidic environment where bacteria can't survive, and at the same time holds in moisture to help tissue rebuild itself. 3,000 years of practice, and modern medicine has confirmed every bit of it. Now, about sugar and diabetes. Straight talk, no sugarcoating. If you've got type 2 diabetes or prediabetes, you absolutely need to talk to your doctor about any changes in your diet, including honey. That's serious, and I ain't gonna pretend otherwise. But if you don't have blood sugar problems, a small amount of raw honey, 1 or 2 teaspoons a day, ain't the threat they make it out to be. The glycemic index of raw honey is lower than white sugar, and what it does to your body is a whole different thing, because of those very enzymes and active compounds I just told you about. My grandfather always said, a spoonful of honey in the morning is a prayer for your stomach. He didn't know the word prebiotic, but he knew that after honey, folks felt better. And he was right. Back home, the old-timers ate honey every single day, and many of them lived deep into old age with sharp minds and strong legs. I'm not saying it was just the honey. I'm saying honey was part of their life every day. And that ain't a coincidence. How do you pick the right honey? Raw only, unprocessed, preferably from a local beekeeper. The color can vary from light yellow to dark brown. That's perfectly normal. Real honey crystallizes over time. That's a sign of quality, not spoilage. If your honey has been sitting for a year and it's still flowing like water, you ought to be asking yourself what exactly is in there. But here's what's interesting. We've talked about olive oil, garlic, and honey. All three support your body from the inside every single day. But the next biblical superfood works differently. It's the fruit that the prophet Isaiah used as a poultice for King Hezekiah's deadly illness, and the king survived. What that fruit is, and what it does for your bones and blood sugar, that's coming up right now. Here's a story I tell everybody who comes to me with bone problems or blood sugar trouble. King Hezekiah, one of the most honored kings of Israel, fell deathly ill. The prophet Isaiah came to him and said, "Take a lump of figs and lay it on the boil." They did, and the king survived. That's written right there in 2 Kings. And you know what gets me every single time? 3,000 years later, scientists found compounds in figs with real anti-inflammatory and antibacterial properties. The prophet Isaiah wasn't reading scientific journals. He just knew what worked. Folks come to me after 50 complaining about 2 things that don't seem connected at all. First, their bones have gotten brittle, their labs show low calcium. Second, their blood sugar has been jumping around up and down, and their doctor is already hinting at prediabetes. And here's the thing. Figs work on both of those problems at the same time, not like a pill that hits one target, like smart food that gives your body what it's missing in several directions all at once. Let's start with bones. After 50, especially for women, bones start losing density. They call it osteoporosis, and it's a quiet epidemic. Most folks think calcium means milk. But did you know that 100 grams of dried figs has more calcium than 100 grams of milk? That fact surprises just about everybody. On top of that, figs have magnesium and vitamin K, 2 things that help calcium absorb properly and go straight to your bones instead of settling in your blood vessels. That's a real important point, because just taking calcium without those compounds is like trying to build a house without any mortar. Now about blood sugar. Figs are loaded with fiber, a special kind called pectin. Pectin works in your gut like a sponge. It slows down how fast sugar gets absorbed into your blood. That means after a meal with figs, your blood sugar doesn't spike sharply. It rises slow and steady. In my experience, folks with prediabetes who swap out other sweets for a few dried figs tend to notice their blood sugar behaving a whole lot calmer. But again, if you've been diagnosed with diabetes, you talk to your doctor about any changes. My grandfather talked about figs plain and simple. This is food for a long life. Back home, folks dried them for winter and ate a few every day, like medicine, only good tasting. Nobody called it a superfood. They just knew. Figs strengthen you. And those people were working in the fields into their 70s without blood pressure pills and without insulin shots. I'm not saying it was just the figs. I'm saying that kind of food was part of every single day. Now here's how to eat figs right after 50. Fresh figs are wonderful if you can get them, but dried figs are a concentrate of everything good, and they're available year-round. 3 or 4 pieces a day. That's plenty. Don't go overboard, because dried figs are high in natural sugars, and you don't want too much. Best eaten in the morning with oatmeal or with some cottage cheese. The fiber in the figs combined with protein slows sugar absorption even further. That's a simple folk trick that flat out works. And here's one more thing about figs that almost nobody talks about. They contain a natural enzyme called phycin. It helps digestion and, according to some research, may have antiparasitic properties. In ancient times, figs were specifically given to people recovering from illness, to restore digestion and strengthen the body. That ain't a coincidence. That's accumulated wisdom from thousands of years that we're only now starting to understand from a scientific standpoint. But keep this in the back of your mind. We've now covered 4 biblical superfoods. Each one works on your body in its own way. But the next one, that's a special case altogether. They called it the royal fruit. It was embroidered on the robes of the high priests, and it contains 3 times more antioxidants than green tea, which everybody raves about. I'm talking about pomegranate, and what it does for your heart and your memory after 60. That's something every single person needs to hear. When I first read about pomegranate in the Bible, I didn't even realize right away just how serious this was. Pomegranates were embroidered on the robe of the high priest, the man who entered the Holy of Holies once a year. That was the most sacred place on earth, and on that man's garment was a pomegranate. That wasn't by accident. In the ancient world, symbols were chosen with care. The pomegranate meant life, fertility, and health. And you know what? Today, science explains exactly why. Because packed inside that fruit is such a concentration of healing compounds that researchers still haven't been able to fully map it all out. Let me give you one specific fact: the antioxidant capacity of pomegranate. That ain't just an abstract word. It's a measurable number. And it comes in 3 times higher than green tea, which everybody holds up as the gold standard of healthy, and nearly twice as high as red wine. Antioxidants are what neutralize free radicals in your body, and free radicals are what destroy your cells, speed up aging, and trigger the inflammatory processes that lead to heart disease, cancer, and memory loss. After 60, that becomes critically important, because as you get older, your body handles it worse and worse on its own. In 40 years of working with natural remedies, pomegranate is the one I point to most for folks dealing with heart trouble and memory problems. Those are 2 areas where it works most noticeably. Let's start with the heart. Pomegranate contains special compounds, punicic acids and polyphenols. They help bring down bad cholesterol while supporting good cholesterol at the same time. In my experience, folks who drink pure pomegranate juice regularly with no added sugar tend to find their blood pressure running steadier. That ain't a miracle. That's chemistry that nature figured out long before any of us came along. Now about memory, and this is where it gets real interesting. Scientists found that the polyphenols in pomegranate can cross the blood-brain barrier. That means they get right into your brain. And once they're there, they do the same thing they do everywhere else in your body: damp down inflammation and protect cells from breaking down. Your brain after 60 is an organ that needs protection more than just about anything else, because nerve cells don't bounce back the same way skin cells or gut cells do. And what you eat today, That's a straight-up investment in how sharp your mind stays 5 and 10 years from now. My grandfather talked about pomegranate plain and simple. This is the blood of the earth. He didn't mean the color of the juice, though the color does match. He meant the strength. Back home, pomegranate was given to folks who'd been sick a long time and just couldn't get their strength back. Not as medicine, but as food that brings you back. And people really did get back on their feet. I've seen it with my own eyes more times than I can count. Now let's get practical. How do you use pomegranate right after 50? First, fresh pomegranate juice with no added sugar, about 4 to 5 ounces a day. No more than that because it's acidic and in large amounts it can irritate your stomach and your tooth enamel. Dilute it with water 1:1 if your stomach runs sensitive. Second, eat the seeds themselves. And eat them with the white membrane. Yes, that slightly bitter film that everybody throws away. That's actually where a big chunk of the polyphenols are concentrated. That's a folk trick the ancient world knew, and the modern world has plain forgotten. And here's one important thing. If you're on blood thinners or blood pressure medication, you make sure to tell your doctor that you're starting to drink pomegranate juice regularly. Pomegranate can strengthen the effect of certain medications, and that needs to be accounted for. That don't mean pomegranate is dangerous. It means it's powerful enough to take seriously. We've now covered 5 biblical superfoods: olive oil, garlic, honey, figs, pomegranate. Each one is its own story of strength and wisdom. But the next 2 stand apart, because these are plants that Jesus himself talked about. One of them is called the golden spice today, the one that started a revolution in modern medicine. And the other is a tiny little seed that Jesus said, if you have faith even the size of this, you can move mountains. What those 2 plants are, and why science is only now catching up to words spoken 2,000 years ago, that's coming up right now. Jesus talked about the mustard seed twice in 2 different Gospels. He said, the kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, which is the smallest of all seeds, but grows into a great tree. Most folks have heard that parable, but not many stop and think about this. Why the mustard seed specifically? Why not wheat or grapes or figs? All of those are mentioned in the Bible too. Trust me on this. In the ancient world, words weren't chosen by accident. Mustard was one of the best-known healing plants of that time. Everybody knew its power. And when Jesus talked about the mustard seed, the people around him understood. He was talking about something that seems the smallest, but is stronger than most. Now let's get into what mustard actually does to your body after 50. Mustard seeds contain glucosinolates, compounds that, once inside your body, convert into substances with powerful anti-inflammatory and even anti-tumor properties. That ain't folktales. Those are the findings of serious scientific research over the last 20 years. Mustard oil improves circulation and helps your joints. Mustard seeds stimulate digestion and support your liver. And all of that in a tiny little seed that Jesus talked about 2,000 years ago. But now, turmeric. And here I need to tell you something straight. Turmeric isn't mentioned in the Bible by name the same clear way garlic or honey are. But it was part of the trade routes of the ancient world. It was used in ritual incense and healing preparations all across the Middle East. Some researchers believe it was part of the sacred anointing oil. That's a debated question, and I'll be straight with you. I don't know the exact answer. But here's what I do know for certain. When it comes to the power of fighting inflammation, turmeric is one of the most studied plants on this planet today. Turmeric contains curcumin. That compound has been the subject of more than 10,000 scientific studies. 10,000. Curcumin suppresses inflammatory molecules in your body, the very ones that trigger arthritis, heart disease, diabetes, and the breakdown of your brain. After 50, chronic inflammation is your #1 enemy. Quiet, invisible, constant. And curcumin goes straight after it. I'm not making that up. That's what thousands of studies around the world are showing. But here's the folk trick without which none of this works. Curcumin on its own is very poorly absorbed by your body. You eat it, and most of it just passes right through. But if you add black pepper to your turmeric, everything changes. Black pepper contains a compound called piperine, which increases the absorption of curcumin by 20 times. 20 times, that ain't an exaggeration. That's a specific number from research. And you know what? That's exactly how turmeric was mixed in ancient healing preparations across the Middle East, always with pepper. Folk wisdom found that combination thousands of years before science explained why. My grandfather never heard the word curcumin, but he always said, "Yellow spice with pepper is warmth for your joints and peace for your belly." Back home, the old-timers made a simple drink: a spoonful of turmeric, a pinch of black pepper, a spoonful of honey, a glass of warm milk or water. Today they call it golden milk and sell it in fancy cafes for big money. But my grandfather made it every winter for next to nothing, and his joints worked right up until the last day of his life. Folks come to me with arthritis, with aching knees, with that morning stiffness that just won't quit. I tell them the same thing every time. Try a quarter teaspoon of turmeric with a pinch of black pepper every morning. In your soup, in your tea, in warm milk, however works for you. Give it 3 months. In my experience, many folks notice their joints start moving easier, morning stiffness eases up, and the general inflammation in their body settles down. This ain't a quick fix. It's slow, smart support for your body, the way real folk medicine is supposed to work. But I need to tell you one more thing about turmeric. In large amounts, it can thin your blood and affect your gallbladder. If you're on blood thinners or you've had gallbladder trouble, talk to your doctor first. Moderation is the #1 principle of folk healing. More ain't better. Enough is wise. Now keep this in your head. We've covered 6 biblical superfoods, and every single one works on inflammation, on the heart, on bones, on immunity. But the next 2 foods from the Bible are a whole different category. These were considered poor man's food in the ancient world. The very red stew that Esau sold his birthright for, and the very bread that Jesus broke at the Last Supper. But what they do for your gut and your blood sugar makes them the richest health food of everything we've talked about today. You remember the story of Esau and Jacob? Esau came back from hunting so hungry he was ready to do just about anything. Jacob was cooking lentil stew, red, thick, hot, and Esau said, "Give me some of that red stew," and he sold his birthright for it. Folks read that story and think, what a weak man Esau was, couldn't even wait. But I think about it differently. I think that must have been one heck of a stew to be worth that price. Because lentils in the ancient world weren't poor man's food, they were strength food, and today science explains exactly why Esau wanted them so bad. Lentils are one of the oldest foods in human history. They've been grown in the Middle East for 10,000 years. 10,000. And here's what makes them special. Lentils contain plant protein, complex carbohydrates, and a particular kind of fiber called resistant starch. This stuff behaves in your gut like food for your good bacteria. It doesn't get digested in your small intestine. It travels further down to your large intestine, and there it feeds exactly the bacteria responsible for your immunity, your mood, and your weight. After 50, the makeup of your gut bacteria starts shifting in the wrong direction, and lentils can help turn that around. But the most important thing for folks after 50 is what lentils do to your blood sugar. They have one of the lowest glycemic indexes of any food out there. That means after a bowl of lentil soup, your blood sugar rises slow and steady. No sharp spikes, no crashes. Folks come to me with prediabetes, and the first thing I tell them is, get lentils into your diet 3 times a week. In my experience, many folks notice the difference. Their energy evens out, and that craving for something sweet right after a meal starts fading. That's because your body is getting stable fuel instead of a blood sugar roller coaster. Now, bread. But not the bread sitting on your grocery store shelf. The bread that Jesus broke at the Last Supper was sourdough. Because commercial yeast as we know it today simply didn't exist back then. Dough was leavened naturally through wild yeast and lactic acid bacteria. That process makes bread a fundamentally different product. During the long fermentation, bacteria partially break down gluten and phytic acid. Phytic acid is the compound in grain that blocks the absorption of calcium, iron, zinc, and magnesium. When it's broken down, the minerals from that bread get absorbed several times more effectively. My grandfather never bought store-bought bread a day in his life. We had a sourdough starter at home that had been passed down hand to hand. It lived on the kitchen counter like a member of the family. Grandfather always said, "Real bread is living bread." He meant exactly that the starter holds living bacteria that work for your health. Today we call those probiotics. But grandfather just knew, with that bread, your stomach don't hurt, and your blood sugar don't jump the way it does with regular bread. Here's something practical you can do this very week. Find real sourdough bread. Not the kind with a label that just says sourdough, but the kind with only flour, water, salt, and starter in the ingredients, that was baked for at least 12 hours. That kind of bread is found at small bakeries or farmers markets. The difference in how it affects your stomach and your blood sugar, you'll feel it. And start eating lentils at least twice a week. Soup, stew, salad, doesn't matter. What matters is doing it regularly. And here's one more interesting thing about these two foods. Both lentils and sourdough bread were eaten by plain everyday folks for thousands of years. Not kings, not high priests. Shepherds, farmers, fishermen. People who worked physically from sunup to sundown and still lived deep into old age. They didn't know the word microbiome. They just ate what was available. And their guts worked the way ours often don't today, despite everything modern medicine has going for it. But here's what's important to remember. Your gut is the foundation. Everything I've talked about today, olive oil, garlic, honey, figs, pomegranate, turmeric, all of it gets absorbed and does its work only when your gut is healthy. Lentils and sourdough bread are the foods that lay that foundation. Without them, everything else works at half strength. And now, the next chapter. Because we haven't yet talked about the two fruits that Moses' scouts brought back from the Promised Land as proof that the land was good. Dates and grapes. Those two fruits were carried on a pole by two men. That's how heavy and large they were. And what they do for your nerves, your energy, and your blood pressure after 60, that's what you need to hear next. In the book of Numbers, it's written, Moses sent 12 scouts to spy out the Promised Land. They came back carrying a single cluster of grapes so heavy it took 2 men to carry it on a pole between them. And alongside it, dates and pomegranates. That was their proof that the land was good and generous. Think about that. Out of all the abundance of that land, those are the fruits they chose to bring back. That wasn't by accident. Dates and grapes in the ancient world weren't just food. They were symbols of strength, endurance, and long life. And today, when I look at what these fruits do to a person's body after 60, I understand exactly why. Let's start with dates. Most folks think dates are just real sweet, so they must be bad for you. But here's a fact that surprises just about everybody. Dates are one of the very few sweet foods with a low glycemic index, lower than a banana, lower than many fruits that get called healthy diet food. That's because dates are loaded with fiber that slows down the absorption of their natural sugars. And at the same time, dates are a concentrate of potassium, magnesium, and B vitamins. That's why they give you smooth, lasting energy. Not a spike and a crash, but steady fuel for several hours. After 60, a lot of folks complain about the same thing. By the middle of the day, the energy just drains away. Tiredness sets in. Irritability, sometimes shakiness in the hands. That's often a sign that the nervous system isn't getting enough magnesium and B vitamins. In 40 years of working with natural remedies, I've seen 3 or 4 dates a day change that picture hundreds of times. Not overnight, over a few weeks. But folks would notice, energy got steadier, sleep got deeper, nerves got calmer. My grandfather always said, the date is the bread of the desert. People in the desert survived on dates and water for weeks at a time. This ain't just a sweet snack, it's concentrated life force. Now about grapes, and here I want to tell you something that almost nobody talks about. Everybody knows about resveratrol in red wine. Everybody's heard, a little red wine is good for your heart. But what nobody mentions is that resveratrol isn't in the wine. It's in the skin and seeds of dark grapes. Wine is just one way to get it. And not even the best way, because alcohol puts a load on your liver all by itself. But fresh dark grapes eaten with their seeds, That right there is the original source of everything. Resveratrol is a compound grapes produce to protect themselves from fungi and ultraviolet light. And what it does inside the human body is something remarkable. It activates longevity genes, the very genes that switch on during fasting and that slow down the aging process at the cellular level. Scientists call them sirtuins. In my experience, you don't need to explain the mechanism to folks. You just need to say, dark grapes with seeds are food eaten by people who live to 100 with sharp minds and working bodies, and that ain't a coincidence. But here's what's important to know about grapes after 50. Grape seeds contain proanthocyanidins, some of the most powerful antioxidants found anywhere in nature. They strengthen the walls of your capillaries, improve circulation, and help with varicose veins and swollen legs. Folks come to me with heaviness and swelling in their legs, especially women after 55. I tell them, start eating dark grapes with the seeds. Not everybody can swallow the seeds whole, then just chew them real well. Most folks notice after 4 to 6 weeks that the heaviness in their legs has eased up. That's those seeds going to work on your blood vessels. Now, here's how to eat these two fruits right. Dates. 3 or 4 a day, best in the first half of the day, works real well with a few nuts. The protein slows the sugar absorption down. Grapes. A small bunch of dark variety every day, seeds and all. You can split it into 2 servings. Fresh is better than dried raisins, though raisins are fine in small amounts too. Both of these foods are easy to find, don't cost much, and don't require any cooking whatsoever. We've now covered 8 biblical superfoods, but I need to tell you about 2 more that most folks don't even think of as food at all, even though they were literally saving lives in biblical times. One was used in the cleansing of lepers, the other was used at the burial of Jesus himself. Hyssop and aloe. And what they do for your lungs, your skin, and your immune system today, that's the last thing you need to hear before I bring everything together. When Jesus was on the cross and said, "I thirst," the soldiers soaked a sponge in vinegar and lifted it to his lips on a branch of hyssop. That's written right there in the Gospel of John. And at the burial of Jesus, Nicodemus brought a mixture of myrrh and aloe, about 100 pounds of it. 100 pounds. That was an enormous, almost unimaginably costly amount for those times. These were not random plants. These were the most revered healing substances of the ancient world. And the fact that they appeared at the most sacred and tragic moments in all of biblical history, that tells you everything about how seriously people of that era took them. Let's start with hyssop, because this plant is almost completely forgotten today, even though it's mentioned more than 20 times in the Bible. In Psalm 51, King David prays, "Purge me with hyssop, and I shall be clean." Hyssop was used in rituals of cleansing. It was used to sprinkle people, homes, and objects. But that wasn't just a symbolic act, because hyssop contains compounds with real antibacterial and antifungal properties. People intuitively knew where hyssop goes, cleanliness follows. And they were right. In 40 years of working with natural remedies, hyssop is what I point to most for folks with respiratory problems. That's where it shines. Hyssop contains essential oils, pinene, camphor, isopinocamphone, that help thin mucus and ease breathing. In my experience, folks with chronic bronchitis, with lingering effects after pneumonia, with mild asthma notice real relief from hyssop tea. This ain't a fast-acting inhaler. It's gentle, gradual support for your respiratory system that people have been using for thousands of years. My grandfather always kept dried hyssop in the kitchen. When anybody in the family was coughing, he'd brew hyssop with honey and give it to them in small sips. Not by the bucketful, just a small cup 3 times a day. He used to say, hyssop opens up the chest. And the folks who drank that tea really did cough less and breathe easier. I saw it time and again. And today, when I read about the essential oils of hyssop in scientific articles, I always think, grandfather knew all of this without any science at all. But here's an important warning about hyssop. Pregnant women and people with epilepsy should not use hyssop. Some of its compounds can trigger unwanted reactions. That's serious, and I'm telling you straight. For everyone else, moderate use as a tea or a seasoning is perfectly safe. Moderation is always the key word in folk healing. Now, aloe. And here's where most folks make one big mistake. They know aloe as a skin plant, rub it on a burn, on a cut, and that's that. But the aloe used in biblical times, that was aloe vera and aloe socotrina, and it was used in a completely different way, internally. The juice and gel of aloe were drunk as a healing remedy. And what it does to your gut is a whole different level altogether. Aloe vera gel contains a special polysaccharide called achamanan. This compound coats the lining of your intestine, helping it heal from inflammation and irritation. After 50, many folks start dealing with what doctors call irritable bowel syndrome, or chronic inflammation of the digestive tract. People come to me with constant bloating, stomach pain, irregular bowel movements, and many of them notice improvement from a small amount of fresh aloe gel or natural juice with no preservatives or additives. That gentle coating action is often exactly what an inflamed gut is missing. But here's what you absolutely need to know about aloe. Internal use. Only the gel, that clear substance from the center of the leaf. Never consume aloe latex. That's the yellow substance just under the skin of the leaf. It has an extremely powerful laxative effect and in larger amounts is toxic. These are two completely different substances even though they come from the same plant. Always only the gel and always in small amounts, 1 or 2 tablespoons a day. If you have kidney disease or you're on serious medications, talk to your doctor first. And here's what I want to say at the end of this part. Hyssop and aloe are 2 plants that people use for thousands of years for cleansing and healing. They stood alongside the most sacred moments in human history. And today, they're just as available as they ever were. Hyssop grows in a backyard garden or sits right there in the spice aisle. Aloe sits in a pot on the windowsill in millions of homes. And most of those folks don't even realize they've got one of the oldest healing plants on earth living right in their house. We've now covered 9 biblical superfoods, each one its own story. But now comes the most important part. Because knowing is one thing. Doing is something else entirely. And in the next part, I'm bringing everything together in a way that any person over 50 needs to hear before we're done. No diets, no expensive supplements. Just the truth about what really matters. And why it's been sitting in plain sight for 3,000 years. You know, in 40 years of working with people, I've noticed one pattern that never changes. Folks come see me, they listen, they nod, they say, yes, I understand. I'm gonna start doing this. And a month later, they come back and say, I never started. Not because they're lazy, not because they don't believe, but because they look at all of it like a big mountain, and they don't know which rock to start climbing from. That's why this last part right here is the most important thing I've said all day, because knowledge without action is just pretty words. Let me tell you something that doesn't get said often enough. All of these foods, olive oil, garlic, honey, figs, pomegranate, turmeric and mustard, lentils, sourdough bread, dates, grapes, hyssop, aloe, they didn't end up on the pages of the most widely read book in the history of humanity by accident. The people who lived thousands of years ago didn't have laboratories or microscopes, but they had something else. Generations of living experience passed down hand to hand. They watched, they tried. They remembered what worked, and they wrote it into sacred texts so that knowledge wouldn't be lost. Trust me on this. I've seen people who swallowed handfuls of pills for years and kept feeling worse, and I've seen other people, plain country folks who never heard the word antioxidant in their lives, but who ate what we talked about today every single day. And those people were working in their gardens at 75, remembered the names of every grandchild and great-grandchild, and got up in the morning without knee pain. That ain't a fairy tale. That's what I've seen with my own eyes. My grandfather always said, the Lord never made a sickness without making a remedy. The remedy is always nearby. You just gotta know where to look. I've lived 60 years, 40 of them spent studying folk remedies. And the more I learn, the more convinced I am. Grandfather was right. The most powerful thing there is for human health ain't sitting in an expensive pharmacy, and it ain't in a TV commercial. It's in a backyard garden, at a farmer's market, in a kitchen cupboard. It's what people have been eating for thousands of years. It's what's been proven not by one generation, but by hundreds of generations of real people who lived by it and healed by it. But here's what I really want you to understand. Not one of these foods works like a magic pill. Not one of them replaces your doctor when you need serious medical help. I'm telling you that straight, because I respect you. Folk medicine ain't a replacement for modern medicine. It's an ally. It's what you do every single day between doctor visits. It's the foundation your health stands on, and that foundation can be strengthened every day. No prescriptions, no waiting rooms, no big money. Now I want to ask you one question, and I'm asking you to think about it honestly. Out of everything we covered today, what's already familiar to you? What do you already have at home right now? Olive oil, garlic, honey, an aloe plant on your windowsill? I'll bet most of you have at least 3 or 4 of these things in your house already. You just weren't using them right. You just didn't know what people knew 3,000 years ago. Well, now you do. Folks come to me sometimes and say, "Earl, this is all well and good, but I'm already old. It's too late to change anything." I tell them the same thing every time. You know when the best time to plant a tree is? 20 years ago. And when's the second best time? Today. Same thing with your health. Doesn't matter how old you are. Doesn't matter how many years you ate the wrong things. The body is remarkably good at healing itself if you give it the right tools. And those tools were described 3,000 years ago in a book that has outlasted every empire, every war, and every change this world has seen. In 40 years, I've watched people search for health in expensive places, clinics, pharmacies, advertised miracle cures, and every time I think the same thing. They're walking right past what's sitting at their feet, right past what costs next to nothing, right past what the Lord put on this earth long before the first pharmacy ever opened. The Bible ain't just a spiritual book. It's the oldest and most proven guide to living long and healthy on this earth. And today, you and me, we read some of its most important pages together. Take this knowledge. Don't let it go. Start with one step, any step, the smallest one you can think of. Because 1,000 small steps in the right direction will always add up to more than one big step you never took. I believe that with everything I've got, and I believe in you.